Greetings once again to the Pilgrim Church of Christ family and to any visitors who may have tuned in. This is Danny, once again on behalf of the elders, with today's spiritual dose. This is for Tuesday, November 17th. This is actually part two, the dose that we began last week. We're looking at the 7 last words of Christ, the 7 last things that he uttered, statements that he uttered while he was hanging on the cross. Last week we looked at the first 3, where we noticed that they expressed his concern for other people, and then tonight we're going to look at the last 4 to show where he expressed his concern about himself. Once again, I'd like to read a harmonized narrative that contains all of the 7 statements, and then we'll pick up our study. There were also 2 others, criminals, led with him to be put to death. And when they had come to the place called Calvary, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right hand and the other on the left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." Then one of the criminals who were hanged blasphemed him, saying, "If you are the Christ, save yourself and us." But the other answering rebuked him, saying, "Do you not even fear God, seeing you are under the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said to Jesus, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said to him, "Assuredly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing by, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, that disciple took her to his own home. Now when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which is translated, my God, why have you forsaken me?" After this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, said, "I thirst." So when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished." And when Jesus had cried out with a loud voice, he said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Having said this, he breathed his last. As I said a minute ago, we looked at the first 3 statements from the cross last week. If you have not seen that, you may want to pause the video right here and go to the church Facebook page and search out and find the dose from last week from November 10th and view that, and that will give you the some details about the first 3 statements that Jesus made from the cross. And then when you're through, come back here and we'll pick up with the final 4 sayings from the cross. With the 4th saying from Jesus, we have a word of despair. This is from Matthew 27, verse 46, and Mark 15:34, where he said, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which is translated, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This word of despair was a cry of desolation. This is the first of the 4 statements that show Jesus' concern about his physical body. This was not the first time that Jesus had displayed despair during his ministry. He did it several times. For example, when a rich young ruler came to him, the one that we talked about in our study last week, when he went away disappointed, when he saw the unbelief of his own disciples who woke him during a storm in the boat, when he spoke with the scribes and the Pharisees, in fact, multiple times with them, he showed despair. But whenever there was a lack of faith displayed, whether it was by his own disciples, by the religious leaders of the time, or by rulers, then Jesus would respond with despair and disappointment. Now these words of Jesus, this word of despair from the cross, came during an unnatural phenomenon. I don't know if you noticed that in the reading or not, but this was following 3 hours of darkness, which occurred in the middle of the day. In Scripture, darkness is often used to signify a lack of understanding, or ignorance, or depravity, even separation from God. So when we look at this word of despair from Jesus' lips, it indicates that while he was hanging physically suspended between earth and heaven, he also felt that he was hanging spiritually suspended between mankind and God. See, he had come to this life bearing the fullness of deity's holiness, and mankind had turned its back on him. Now he came to the cross bearing the fullness of humanity's sin, and the Father was forced to turn his back. Interesting, of the 7 utterances from the cross, this one, number 4, being right in the middle, is his word of despair. The 5th word we have is a word of physical torment. This is from John 19, verse 28. 2 simple words. I thirst. In the recording of that, it's in our English translation, it has a punctuation of an exclamation point, as if it were something that was pronounced very strongly. Knowing what we know about crucifixion, I wonder if it was a strong pronouncement or if it was exhibited more a weak, almost breathless utterance of I thirst. This was a cry of physical anguish. This is the second showing of concern of the 4 that Jesus uttered. Now, we need to never forget that although Jesus was God among men, he still, being fully man, experienced all the physical emotions and characteristics of his manhood, both negative and positive. Some negative examples are the hunger he felt that led to Satan's temptation, the anger he felt when he cleansed the temple a couple of times, the disappointment he felt, we talked about earlier, as despair, especially with his own apostles' lack of understanding and faith, and even the weariness he felt from the press of the crowds that were constantly around him. For some positive examples of the physical emotions that Jesus felt, we see the love that he demonstrated with not only Lazarus, but Lazarus's sisters, Mary and Martha. We see the compassion that he demonstrated anytime somebody either came to him or was in his presence and was in need. We also see his expression of faith in his claiming so many times that he knew the Father, and his expression of happiness. I especially like the expressions of happiness we see in the times that he spent with children gathered around him. Crucifixion by death was not invented by the Romans, but we're told that they did perfect it. So it became that time's most cruel form of capital punishment. If you've never read a book by Jim Bishop called The Day Christ Died, I highly recommend it. It gives a very detailed account of the day of Christ's crucifixion with a lot of background material that's very beneficial to our understanding. I've got one quote here that he says regarding this particular period of time while Jesus was on the cross as he neared the end. This is what Jim Bishop says, quote, Jesus became conscious of 2 unendurable circumstances. The first was that the pain in his wrists was beyond bearing, and that muscle cramps knotted his forearms, his upper arms, the pads of his shoulders. The second unendurable circumstance was that the pectoral muscles at the side of his chest were being momentarily paralyzed from the weight of his body dragging. This induced in him an involuntary panic, for he found that while he could draw air into his lungs, he was powerless to exhale the air from his lungs. Knowing that, is it any wonder that such physical torture would magnify every need that the human body would express? And at this time, it was expressed by his thirst. The 6th word we have from the lips of Jesus on the cross is recorded in John 19:30. This is a word of triumph, where Jesus exclaimed, "It is finished." This is a cry of victory. The 3rd of 4 statements showing his concern regarding himself. Now, just moments ago, we talked about Jesus' word of despair after experiencing utter separation from God the Father. Now we find this contrasting word of triumphal completion. Now, Matthew, Mark, and Luke do not explicitly record this utterance verbatim, but they all 3 do speak about Jesus crying out with a loud voice just before he died. And most likely that reference regarding to the words that were recorded by John, thankfully. When we study the events of the cross, it reveals multiple paradoxes. For example, 1, Jesus was put to death by sinful man, yet he asked the Father to forgive the very ones who had done so. Secondly, Jesus himself was without sin, and yet he carried all the sins of the world with him to his death on that cross. And third, we find that Jesus died the death of a condemned sinner, yet he died triumphantly. The seventh word of Jesus on the cross was a word of committal. Luke 23:46 says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. We have here a cry of resignation, the fourth of four statements showing his concern regarding himself. By addressing his Father, once again, this emphasizes the bond that Jesus felt he had with and expresses his faith in God the Father. The word commit in the original language can also be translated to render up, to lay down, to give charge, to entrust, to deposit for safekeeping. Note that with all of these various renderings of that Greek word, they all exhibit a willful attitude by the one committing, along with a trusting faith in the one to whom he is committing. The passage, into your hands I commit my spirit, is actually a quote from the 31st Psalm. Now, while the original Psalm is written in the future tense, into your hands I, in parentheses, will commit my spirit, this statement from the lips of Jesus is written in the present tense, a fulfillment of the prophecy that he quotes from Psalm 31. Interestingly enough, this thought of committing our spirits to the Father was later, after Psalm 31, was incorporated into a traditional bedtime prayer that was taught to Jewish children by their parents. Now, the actions that Jesus took that accompany the words, into your hands I commit my spirit, only serve to underscore the voluntary nature of his death. First, Luke says that this final statement from his lips was uttered with a loud voice, despite what we just talked about the difficulty during the crucifixion experience of expelling breath, especially expelling it in a powerful expression. Secondly, typically when individuals were crucified, they would die and then their heads would slump. We're told here that Jesus bowed his head first and then he died. Again, the voluntary nature. And thirdly, it says he gave up his spirit. This denotes a willful surrender of something that no one else had been permitted to forcefully take from him. When Augustine talked about Jesus' death, he made this comment. He gave up his life because he willed it, when he willed it, and as he willed it. While he lived on earth, Jesus had committed his physical life to God and his word and his will. As his earthly life ended, he committed to God all that he had left, his spirit. So that concludes our study of the 7 sayings of Jesus from the cross, and a little bit of study behind each one of them. I hope it's been beneficial to you. I've certainly enjoyed going back over it again and presenting it. So as I prepare to say good night, good day, whatever time of day it may be, I do pray that you're able to stay safe and healthy. I do pray that you're able to spend some quality time with your family and possibly other loved ones. Pray that you're able to participate in our services in some form, either in person because we do have social distancing and masking in place and sanitation. And if not, pray that you're able to view online not only our weekly Sunday services, but also we have a Wednesday night auditorium class that is online, and then we have the D.O.S.E postings that we have on our church Facebook. Once again, always remember that the elders are ever ready to be of assistance in any way we can for any spiritual need that you may have, even physical needs that you may have. Just please get in touch with us, and we'll certainly do all we can to address those. As I close, I would like to once again call up a benediction from the Old Testament. This is one I used a few weeks ago. I liked it so much I'm going to use it again. Taken from Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 through 26. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord smile on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you his favor and give you his peace. I hope you have a blessed day, a blessed evening, a blessed night, and take care. Stay in touch with God through your prayers and through your study of his word. And I love every one of you. Bye.